My story starts off in a Sunday school class with a teacher who would remind us the importance of tithing. He firmly believed that God would bless us if we were faithful in our tithing and obedient with what God had given us. And he would explain to us that the tithe comes from basically the tenth of your income, or your tenth of what your possession of surplus. And so I remember sitting in a Sunday school class hearing this several times and thinking to myself, well, yeah, I'd love to give a tithe if I could afford it. I don't have the money right now. Actually, things are really tight, and I can't afford to give a tenth. And what I was doing up to that point is giving leftovers. If I had some money left over at the end of the month, I was like, let me give some to God. And that was it for my giving. And later on, I remember sometime afterwards being in a small group talking with the people in the small group, and we were talking about giving to church an offering. And I remember them talking about how only 2 to 4% of the people in the church actually tithe. And I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I'm one of that 98% of people that aren't tithing. And I felt convicted. I felt that God has asked us to do that, to give that tenth back to Him. I remember going back home and making that decision and being nervous, saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give 10% to God and take Him up on His promise. So I was a teacher at the time, and we got paid once a month, pretty much at the beginning of the month. So when I got paid at the beginning of that month, first check I wrote was the tithe on my total income for that month. And I remember dropping in the plate at church and being nervous about it, but kind of excited, but also knowing in the back of my head, wow, I really do need this money to make ends meet. And sure enough, we ran out of money before we ran out of month, and I started to stress a little, thinking, how are we going to make this? I still had probably close to over a week, maybe 10 days before I was going to get my next paycheck. But we stuck with it. And I remember one evening, there was a knock on my door, and I opened the door, and there was my Sunday school teacher standing there, which was really odd because he never ever came by my house, didn't even know he knew where I lived. I invited him in, and he came in, and he said, hey, I want you to know that God laid it on my heart to give you this. And he handed me an envelope, and he walked out the door, and I remember sitting there looking at this envelope, and I said, I think this is God showing up. And I remember going back to the room, praying, giving thanks to God for whatever was in that envelope, and even asking forgiveness for even doubting Him. And I opened the envelope, and sure enough, there was a check in there for me. And it covered my expenses for the month and helped me realize that I needed to shuffle stuff around and figure out how to make my tithe work within my income. And it just really touched me that this man that had no idea that I had just started tithing a few weeks early, God speaks to him and says, hey, go by and drop this check off to Aaron. And I thought, wow, what a righteous man, what a incredible man and connection that this guy has with God to be driving through North Augusta and stop and come by and drop off something to me that it just blew my mind. And it just right then and there reshaped my thinking. I wanted to be generous. I want to be like him. I want to be the one that I'm driving down the road, God lays it on my heart to do something for somebody, that I do it. And so that whole incident just really reshaped the way I look at giving and generosity.